Hey guys, it's Bridget from Open Chair Counseling back with you again for another great interview. We are following along on the series of therapists around the Enneagram. That's what I'm calling this. So today you'll get to see me interview one of my grad school friends, Nate Mahoney, and get his take on what it's like to be a couples counselor from the lens of an Enneagram Type 3. So without much further ado, because I don't want to spoil anything from the interview, let's jump right on into our conversation with Nate.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Let's do that.
So I'm doing an Enneagram series kind of thing on
Okay.
um, different counselors' perspectives on how they approach therapy from the lens of their Enneagram type.
Go.
So I'm interviewing a colleague of mine who's one of each of the numbers, and you're my three.
All right.
Yeah. So if you would be so kind as to let me kind of pick your brain about a bunch of things, and then I
Sure.
will put it up on the internet for the whole world to see.
Love it. No, that's really cool. I dig the Enneagram a lot. So that's
Yeah.
this is really cool.
Sweet. So if you want to introduce yourself, just kind of let us know who you are and what you're about.
Sure. So I'm Nathan Mahoney. I'm a therapist at West Michigan Wellness Group. I've been there for a little over a year. I specialize mostly in couples, but I do some individual therapy as well. A lot of marriage focus in my work. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Sweet. And are you using a lot of the Gottman stuff when you do couples counseling?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
So I've gone through some Gottman training, and yeah, like that's why, especially the sound relationship house and kind of
Mhm.
foundations, and kind of follow a lot of those paths, and kind of directing couples towards what they want to be rather than maybe what they're running from. In a
Mm.
lot in a lot of that in a lot of that. So yeah, it's been really influential in my work, especially as in my Enneagram type, as you'll kind of see. I think Gottman's work really gravitates towards pragmatism and a lot of things. So it's
Yeah.
very. I end up using that a lot in my work.
Yeah. I just did the Gottman level one training like a week ago, and I didn't
Uh,
realize how much actual math and science went into all of their research.
there's a lot.
I thought it was just like a lot of interviews that they had done,
Yep.
but they said that they can actually use data and plug it into like a formula with, I don't know, like 94% accuracy or something to figure out if a couple is going to end up staying together.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like sometimes that kind of scares me. It's like, do we over analyze, right?
Yeah.
Something that's a little bit more of like an art form, but it definitely lends to that. Like, okay, like through a lot of practical steps,
Right.
we can guide couples through some of these processes. But I definitely still like would throw a grain of salt in it, in the sense
Mhm.
that like I think there's some like art there, and there's some
Yeah.
things that can't be totally analyzed. But I definitely appreciate John and Dr. John and Dr.
And
Julie's
Julie.
work there. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So what got you into doing counseling in the first place? What made you decide you wanted to be a therapist?
So I think sort of a lot of people, but like my story involves going to see therapy myself, and kind of doing that work and that journey through a lot of things that happened, workplace a lot, like and talk about work, and got really into spiritual life, and just in my just personal life in general, and through like the end of it, I was like, kind of like in a crossroads in my career,
Mhm.
and I kind of saw, and I ended up actually talking to my therapist, like, so like, what do you do? And having some of those conversations, and that kind of started me on a path of like kind of interest and then inquiry, and then suddenly I was in classes, and then suddenly I had a degree, and now here we are.
Right, just kind of
So
snowballed.
yeah, yeah, but it's been a little bit of a journey, and it was something that I think I'm, and we can kind of get into that a little bit. I'm definitely a person who keeps different options open and likes to have my foot in a lot of different areas, and
Hmm.
maybe stretch myself a little bit, and this career path has definitely stretched me, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. So did you find out about the Enneagram before you started your master's program or after you'd already started counseling?
It was after I'd already started counseling. It's like
Okay.
actually in my friend group, I'd kind of heard about it, and just kind of like talked about, and then books, Richard Rohr, and in the reading about it, and then
Hmm.
then of course immediately going online and taking a test to see what my Enneagram type was, and it's held pretty steady here throughout. But yeah, it kind of gravitated towards me. It was like, 'cause there's, a bunch of different, personality types and these different quizzes and things, but like this one really struck a chord with me and really
Mm.
felt like, like, and it just really spoke to a lot of different ways, and it really started to have a lot of threads that like, oh, okay, that's interesting, and especially actually when me and my girlfriend at the time, but now my wife, we started kind of took the test and kind of like, then what I really did is like, how do we relate to each other? And it was
Yeah.
amazing how much it like actually improved our relationship
Mm.
of like looking at like what our different types were, like, oh yeah, all these things that it says like we struggle with, yeah, we struggle with like down to a T, like
Yeah.
really, really specific. And I was like, that's kind of scary, a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like where I really started like, okay, there's a lot of credence here. It feels like at least enough to like use as a building block,
Right.
as you go into therapy. So I think it's definitely a tool to use.
Yeah, and I think that's what freaks a lot of people out is like, well, I don't want to find out what my Enneagram type is because I don't want to be put in a box.
Hmm.
But
Yep.
I felt the same way when I learned about the Enneagram type and what type I am and what type my husband is. That like it gave us language to talk about things that I didn't realize we needed to talk about because like we just kept butting heads about things and I didn't understand like why are we handling things so differently?
Yep.
And then once I
Yeah.
started to figure out like, oh, it's because the way that I approach things, the way he approaches things are like completely different and we just need to verbalize that and understand that about the other person.
I think it opens the door for empathy, like
Absolutely.
in a huge way, right?
Yeah.
To help like you understand not only just romantic partners, but just relationships in general,
Mhm.
and understand like not everybody thinks the same way, and this is
Mm.
really like this really gives a lot of language to
Right.
that of like people are really wired differently, and it's not
Mhm.
all wrong and right. The way I think isn't necessarily right compared to the way somebody else is wired, and I think I don't know. I just the capital E empathy, I think, was what I feel like really came out of a lot of the work in it.
Yeah, for sure. So you're an Enneagram 3, right?
I am
Okay.
a Enneagram 3, and if we're getting into the wings, I'm an Enneagram 3 with a wing 4
Yeah, for
is
sure.
where I land on the scale. Yeah,
So
the
for
way I
people Oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
So for people who are watching who maybe don't know what the Enneagram 3 is, how would you describe it?
So the Enneagram 3 is so it's nicknamed like the achiever,
Mhm.
and it's the person who's probably very goal oriented, success oriented, and probably in a negative way, kind of becomes like image oriented.
Mm.
It really a lot of effect in like how am I being perceived and how am I being. What do people think of me,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
I think everybody has that a little bit, but threes definitely have that probably like a greater way.
Mm.
And then with the wing four, which is kind of like I think there's really the romantic, the individualist. I think
Yeah.
are some of the terms used for that. And so when you kind of combine that, the way I like to describe the three wing four is, um, you know, I want to succeed, but I want to do it my way.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
always kind of say I'd rather, if you were described, one sentence, it's like I would rather get a B plus doing it my way than an A doing it the way everybody else does, right? And
Hmm.
so I think that's kind of like I would rather blaze a trail and get my B plus, and that's going to be way more satisfying to me, because I achieved it. I still got to, what I would consider, as everybody's threshold is a little bit different. What I would
Yeah.
consider a good grade,
Uh-huh.
but I did it in like a different way than what would, a little bit countercultural way. And so
Yeah.
like that's what gives me the most like, hey, elation, joy,
Mhm.
like in probably work. And so that's kind of yeah, like in a nutshell, like how I would kind of describe a three a little bit. A lot of the stereotype of like usually extroverted, usually kind of the life of a party can be a little bit right, but like definitely striving towards goals and success and whatever success means to their family, values, whatever. It's a definitely a bar of success that's being always being striven towards.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really interesting take on being a 3. I don't know if I'd thought about it that way from, like, the perspective of a 3 wing 4, like, I'd rather get a lower grade, but do it my way and feel really satisfied in that.
Hmm.
Because I've heard threes are very big into like they want to be the best.
Hmm.
And I think there's kind of like this expectation that the best automatically means like you got an A, but you're saying like if it was my best and the way that I wanted to do it, then like the A doesn't matter.
Correct. Yeah, it's like I still
Mhm.
have to get a good grade. It can't be I did it my way and got a D or a
Right.
C, right?
Right. Right.
But yeah, like I think especially with the wing four, at least that's how I'm wired. The way so
Mhm.
I'm interpreting it through my lens
Right.
is like I am become way more satisfied if I blaze a trail and kind of like that. That's almost success in and of itself, and then you tack on top of it like, hey, I did it and I succeeded. That's just like the best. That's when the stars align and
Right.
everything's hunky dory in life, and I can worry about all my other. I don't have to worry about all my other problems that
Right.
I have in life.
So on the topic of succeeding and succeeding your way, what does that look like for you as a therapist? What does it mean to be successful in therapy?
Yeah, and exactly right. So that's always like the thing, and has been really tough. Uh, in I think there's a tendency in therapy for myself sometimes to gravitate towards like a prescriptive measure, right?
Mm.
Because like this is what worked with with this couple or this individual, like let's
Right.
just rinse repeat and apply over here and everything's hunky dory.
Right.
And I think that tendency has been met with like, oh, that doesn't always work that way, and success sometimes is more variable in therapy, and it isn't quite a prescriptive, at least what I've seen, quite a prescriptive approach, and
Hmm.
and so it's been a journey for me to kind of like rewire that and like, hey, what is success for this individual, and
Yeah.
make the success of the client more my success, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. So what are they out to achieve right from the beginning,
Right.
and and if there are some low hanging fruit that we can get wins together, that's kind of what I push for right immediately to kind of gain momentum, while kind of understanding that there probably is a larger picture.
Hmm.
If we get wonky for a second, it's probably starting with a very solution oriented
Hmm.
therapy, right off the beginning, and then kind of like veering towards more person centered, more narrative, as we kind of
Yeah.
like, okay, we established relationship, but we're going to establish this relationship with a lot of solution oriented pieces to get wins together.
Yep.
Right. And so that definitely plays into that success, right? Like, hey,
Hmm.
we're doing good together. We're solving problems together. Right. And
Right.
so I think that's kind of how I end up approaching it based on my Enneagram type, because like I like to see that momentum too. I'm sure that plays into it.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense too when you think about the actual process of the therapeutic relationship. Like you kind of start off with a lot of the more like prescriptive things of
Mhm.
figuring out like okay, what's an appropriate diagnosis, what are some treatment plans and goals, um, and then kind of like you were saying, like getting some traction with small wins so that the client feels a lot of buy-in of like, hey, this
Mhm.
is working. I like this therapist. We have a good connection. And then once you kind of go through some of those more objective pieces, you can get into more of the nitty-gritty of like the nuanced emotions behind things and
Yep.
kind of moving from small wins to like what does it look like for you to really accomplish like your big dreams for life.
Yeah, absolutely. No,
Mhm.
I think that really, really applies. And if it was pure solution oriented therapy, it would probably be the end of the relationship there,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
But then it's almost like you kind of enter a different door. It's
Hmm.
like, okay, now that we're here, do you want to go on this journey to explore some inner workings of yourself that can both be super rewarding and super scary, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I that's kind of like the approach, at least based on the Enneagram type that I've kind of taken, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been a joy for me as well.
Yeah. So on the topic of like different approaches, we talked a lot in school, like in our master's program, about like different therapy approaches and theories and stuff. Do you feel like you really nailed one down?
Not totally, except for kind of what I feel that solution oriented approach right off the beginning is pretty standard for me,
Hmm.
unless something is really different and we're dealing with something little bit off the radar DSM wise, I would
Hmm.
say. But yeah, starting with solution orientation and kind of seeing where it goes from there. I find I do end up leading towards narrative work and some person-centered therapy. And the way I kind of approach person-centered therapy, which is really like a broad, is like
Yeah.
it's really just like really client driven, but like really getting like what I call like getting like an inch away from them, right? It's like, okay,
Mm.
what can we do to kind of like walk this together? And we are like in lockstep, and you kind of lead, but like I'm like right here. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of, what ends up doing a lot of the deeper work that I do. Yeah. I think it's funny. I probably use a ton of CBT in
Hmm.
what I do. I
Hmm.
hate worksheets so much that I refuse to ever use any worksheets in my
Which is funny
therapy.
because I create a lot of my own
Yeah, yeah.
worksheets. I'm like,
But I was,
I will forget how to explain this if I don't have it in front of me.
yeah. I think it was because like I hated the worksheet when I was a client,
Yeah.
and I think so. And so there are probably a lot of clients that I've had that would benefit greatly if I used worksheets, but it's I think it's I can't. I don't know. It's
Mm.
too much
Hmm.
for me. But yeah,
I think it's a good way to like sneak journaling in there sometimes, because I think
good
that
point.
like journaling is a great outlet to process your emotions, but people don't want to take the time to do it. So if you give them
Well,
like a couple lines of a worksheet, then they kind of have to journal a couple sentences.
it's a very good point. No, absolutely. It's a low barrier. I mean, the blank white sheet is a lot scarier than something that has a question on it,
Right.
right?
It's like
Yeah,
sneaking your dog's heartworm medicine into a spoonful of peanut butter, you know.
it, very very similar.
Just
Yeah.
hide it in something else and they'll do
Yep.
it.
No, I think that's good advice. I'll probably take some of that. Maybe I'll get the worksheets going. Probably not, but but I'm one step closer to thinking about it. So
Okay. Well, hey, that's progress, right?
progress.
Progress.
What's the what's the stages? I'm pre.
Pre-contemplative?
There you go. Yeah, pre-contemplative on
Yeah.
using worksheets. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Um, and going back, like couples therapy tends to be very more on the solution oriented, right? A little bit more prescriptive, probably why I also veer towards it a little bit
Mhm.
with my
Mhm.
Enneagram type. Uh, but when I do have the chance to kind of do that deeper work, that is kind of like the direction we usually kind of veer towards. It is narrative and kind of what I consider like a person centered ish model.
Yeah. It sounds like it's a good bridge between something that's a lot more structured and something that it does have a lot more room to breathe with the client.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think like the deeper work is definitely much less prescriptive, much more client driven, much more what I consider like the art of therapy when you get to there, while the beginning is definitely much more, okay, we're going to go through these steps. I'm going to explain these
Right.
steps and we're probably going to walk through these steps. Right.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Not to pry too much into people's personal problems, but like have you
sure.
noticed kind of a theme or like a pattern of what people tend to um bring into counseling when they come to see you? Like have you noticed that you tend to draw a particular type of client?
A little bit. Like, so the clients that I think have had success with me, it is like kind of walking through, especially from a marriage perspective. It's walking through a lot of these like pragmatic areas, like of why aren't we communicating? Why aren't we having empathy for each other? Right? It's like asking kind of these questions, right? That can be answered. Then and the answer kind of just then drives right to like, okay, we're not communicating because like, hey, she's not seeing you because you're not meeting her needs because, right? And some of that is Enneagram work, some of that is love language work, some of that is it's like you kind of start to combine all these things of like what is driving these people apart,
Mhm.
right? And why aren't they seeing each other, or why don't they care that they're not
Yeah.
seeing each other, right? And so like some of these kind of like questions, right, that ends up leading towards, okay, why are we here? What are we here to do? And so and then if you're going from like a Gottman method, it's like how do we make each other's dreams come true? Like how do we find shared meaning, right? Well, that's the
Mhm.
top of the shared house, right? But it starts
Yeah.
with like love maps, like who the heck is this person? What
Right.
do you know this person? And then you talk about fighting fairly, and so you kind of like follow some of those like really systematic steps.
Mhm.
If people are willing to do the work, and that's the biggest thing with couples therapy is like
Absolutely.
it's like both people have to be like both feet in, otherwise if one person has one foot out, it's not probably not it almost certainly isn't going to work. And
Mhm.
so it's convincing that like, hey, this is worth it, this is worth doing. And then following these steps can really lead to a lot of healing and can make each other's dreams come true, right? And
Mhm.
it sounds really like fairy tale-ish,
It does. Yeah, it sounds a
but
little cheesy, but
it
but
does,
it's
but
real
it depends on what those dreams are,
for sure.
right? Like having a vision for your future together with this person from a,
Mhm.
not only like, hey, where do we view ourselves? Where do we view ourselves living? Where do we view our, how many kids we going to have, or what do our relations with our kids look like? But it's more of like, what are the feelings I want to feel towards this person, right?
Yeah,
In 20 years, 10 years, right?
yeah.
And it's in that it's chasing some of that, right? And
Mhm,
using that as a goal
mhm.
to run towards, rather than just running from something. And
Right.
I think that's what drives a lot of like my individual therapy too, is like what's our goals? What are we running towards, not running from, in a
Yeah.
lot of ways? What do we want to get to, and what can we do to get there?
Yeah, I like that illustration of running towards a shared goal or shared meaning rather than like running away from a fear.
Hmm.
Mm, I like that. What have you learned most about yourself? Because I'm sure you're constantly like kind of evolving as a person and
Hmm.
as an Enneagram 3. What are you discovering more about yourself the longer that you're in practice?
I'm discovering, so like what I've discovered, like in marriage therapy a little bit,
Mhm.
and it is you end up kind of like, transference, counter transference, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, how is it, oh, interesting, that was an interesting, how was that applying to my marriage?
Mhm.
Or things like that. But I have found that, like, like there's a lot of different people in this world, the way they're
Yeah.
wired, and
Yeah.
there's no like, it, in kind of like going back to some like the pragmatism, there's no, you can't just funnel like everybody down that same. It's like if
Mhm.
the couple is doing something and yeah, it seems a little like strange, or like the way they communicate seems like, hey, I don't know if I would do that.
Mhm.
But it's working and it doesn't feel at least harmful, right? It's not toxic.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, who am I to judge how that kind of like communication? They seem to be wired. It doesn't seem to be having a toxic effect on either of them.
Mhm.
Like, well, maybe you keep on doing it, right?
Yeah.
And so there's been some really like interesting gut checks of like, well, I don't think I would do that, but it seems to work here.
Mhm.
And so I've had to kind of like put my own judgment sometimes on the shelf there and say like, that's really cool that like you guys seem to have worked out a communication style when, yeah, like somebody's wired a little bit differently, but it kind of works for them. I think that's been really fascinating to me, and and had to definitely kind of like check myself a little bit on
Yeah.
some of it. Like, oh, I thought we were going to head this way down my pragmatic approach that we were going to hit, and it's like, well, let's throw that out the window and let's go over here and navigate this a little bit. So,
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I remember in grad school they talked a lot about suspending your own values and personal beliefs and stuff.
mhm,
And I remember thinking like, wow, like gosh, that's going to be really hard. Like I don't know if I can do that. That's going to be a challenge for me. But I think part of like being an Enneagram 6 for me is that a lot of times I have the thought of like, well, there's a very good chance that I don't have all of the information.
mhm,
Like, they might know more about this than I do. And so that's been interesting for me too. A lot of times clients will come in and like tell me things about their lives or how they operate in relationships. And normally I'd probably think like, well, that's weird. Like,
mhm,
that's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. But in a therapy session, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I've ever thought about it that way. I mean, maybe
yeah,
you figured something else out that I didn't know. I
yeah,
could understand that working. I could see that happening.
mhm,
It's interesting how, like, I think just being in this work, like being in this role, doing this work really changes the way that you can see people. And it brings it back to what you were saying about empathy.
mhm. Yeah, I think I think my empathy has hopefully grown being a therapist, I would hope.
Right. That's one of the big goals, right?
You're right. Yeah, I think it has, and it's widened definitely my view. Even before therapy school, like even widened the view of like what quote unquote normal, if not just shattering what quote unquote normal is. Like
Right.
maybe it doesn't exist, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think it's kind of where probably I'm leaning more towards now.
Yeah. So you might have already answered this, but do you feel like there are particular things that you tend to excel at or tend to struggle with because of your Enneagram type?
I think I one of the benefits of a three is goal orientation and working in just kind of like team approach towards goal
Mhm.
setting, and that kind of like that vision of like, okay, we're all going to strive towards this, and kind of trying to set up that snowball of success. I think it has lended well towards that. I think what I've struggled with is and gotten better with is when therapy sometimes, for whatever reason, I'm not the right fit, right, for
Mhm.
somebody, or like,
Yeah.
hey, like didn't work out, and you know, I don't think I take it personally, but it definitely has been like, okay, like that sucks. It makes you sometimes like question the whole model that I do. It's like because it didn't work for one client, right,
Mhm.
or one client wasn't ready to go through something, or
Mhm.
but like not taking that as like a direct hit towards my own ego or anything like that has
Yeah.
probably been something that is a three to work through. I feel like I've gotten a lot better,
Mhm.
but definitely still ways to go.
Right. What helps that get better?
I think uh this is gonna sound bad,
Or
but
is that
like
too big of a question?
no, what helps get it better is probably, you know, talking with other therapists about it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and
Mhm.
we've got a pretty good group here where I work, and we kind of like have staff sessions where we talk about kind of like how we're doing, right, in therapy, and it's kind of talking about that, and especially it's like in I can rationalize and pretty logical, in the sense of like, hey, like if the couple isn't, if they're not both in it, right? And then you get the text that says, hey, we no longer require your services. Yeah, you kind
Mm.
of can read into that, like, okay, like what happened to them? What's going on, right?
Yeah.
But that's a bit of I've gotten better at. It's you kind of have to let them go
Mhm.
and go do their thing, and then if they want to open up that door again, they can.
Right.
So
I think that's one of the hardest things about clients leaving is if they don't give you like a definitive reason why, it just leaves so many unanswered
yep,
questions.
yep,
And it's not appropriate
absolutely.
to go hunting after that answer.
For
Um,
sure.
but yeah, yeah, I've had that happen to me too, where it's just like, oh man, like did I do something wrong? Was I not good enough? Like
Mhm.
what did what did I lack that made them want to look elsewhere? Or like, what did I do that didn't prep them so that they felt ready to take the next step?
Yeah. No, and yeah, it's like, yeah, sometimes you just kind of have to let it go. And sometimes I consider those, I don't know, like chance encounters.
Mm.
It's probably a weird word, but like having one client come in, and it's like, I just chalk it up that like obviously I answered all their questions, and then I had one session, they're good to go, and
Right.
that's
My
probably
and
the success. I have to equate everything into a success, no matter if
right.
it worked or not, right? Yeah, well, obviously I was so great, they only needed one session,
Right.
so
My
good.
my very solution focused
Ex-
initial approach was
Exactly.
enough that in one session we fixed all the
That's
problems.
what they needed. They're fine.
Exactly.
No.
Well, I think you answered all of my questions.
Cool.
Anything that you want to add or any, thoughts that popped up?
No, I just think like this work on Enneagram is like, I think it's important. I think the more self-awareness people can have of like what makes them tick, right?
Mhm.
Because sometimes like we think that like, hey, my therapist has all the answers, right? And they're gonna tell me exactly what to do. And that's not true. I mean, they are the experts of their own lives,
Mhm.
right? They know more intimately their own inner thoughts than anybody else could. So it's like the more self-awareness people have to understand why and what they think, I think is really, really important. And especially as it trends towards like, when stressors happen in people's lives, right? Like stress happens, stuff
Yeah,
happens to people. It
for
sucks.
sure.
Like it's terrible.
Mhm.
And knowing how you react, or at least a smidgen more knowledge of like, hey, like how I react, and you can kind of see like, oh, this is probably pretty negative in my
Mhm.
life. And that will allow somebody to start seeking either help from external help, or turn, okay, I see this now what can I do to start heading towards a more healthy direction, right, of how I handle stress and bad things.
Yeah, lots of personal responsibility.
Mhm.
Mhm. Cool. Well, thanks so much for your time, Nate, and sharing
Yeah.
your thoughts with us on being a therapist who's an Enneagram 3 wing 4.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Lots of fun.
Yeah,
Do you have a wing? I was curious, you
I
said you're a six.
do.
Okay.
Yes, I am a 6 wing 5.
Six wing five, all
Yeah.
right.
I wish I could.
Analyzing all the things.
Yeah, I like to say I'm like kind of especially screwed because um my core number is part of the head triad and my wing is also part of the head triad. So like I'm never out of my head. And that's very irritating. I really wish that I could be a 6 wing 7, but I'm just not that fun.
Yeah, yeah. I'm living around me, like I'm pretty sure like both 3 and the 4, they're both in the heart triad, or they're one of those in the head triad.
There's the head, heart, and the gut.
Yeah.
The I think 4, 5, 6 is head, I think.
Okay. All right. I'll
So I
have to
think,
go back and look. You can edit all this, so we're not doing
yeah, I'll look at it again. I feel like oh man, I don't know as much as I thought I did. But I think 4, 5, 6, or maybe it's 2, 3, 4 is like heart, and 8.
I think
8,
2, 3,
9,
4 is, I think 2, 3, 4 is heart.
Okay, I think you're
So
right.
I'm sticking in that heart triad, very emotionally driven in a lot of ways, I think. And I think that speaks true. A lot of it has spoken true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I think 8, 8, 9, 1, I think are gut, 2, 3, 4 are heart, and 5, 6, 7 are head.
I think
Sound
you're
right?
right. I think you're right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you're fully rooted in heart then.
Yeah, which kind of like, it's funny that like the 3 would be considered part of the heart triad, but I think it's like I think they're very wired against failure, or the fear of failure drives a lot of thoughts. And then that image based that we talked about. Yeah, like that, I think, it's like sometimes you think like, what does this person think of me? And maybe that's ego, but like I've stopped thinking that more of now, seeing clients, but it's kind of like, I guess I take it as an approval. It's like, well, I guess they're still coming, so they think there's enough of me, I guess, to still show up.
Right. So, I must be good enough.
Yeah,
like enough
I guess so for this week at least.
Right, for this week. 1 week at a time.
That's really cool. Well, I'm excited. This was really fun, Bridget. It was really good to catch up here. I appreciate you reaching out, and I'm excited to see your series. So is it coming out like a video series, dropping all at once, or like doing right in a row? How's it going to be released?
I've tried to get in the habit of uploading something every Monday.
Cool.
So I have one of my interviews already kind of like in the queue, ready to go. I was going to try to do them in order, but with everybody's schedule, I'm probably just going to do like all over the place. So it'll probably go like one of my old coworkers who's a 1, probably you next, who's a 3. I have somebody lined up who's a 7. So yeah.
Fun.
Yeah.
Well, enjoy.
Thank you.
Good luck with the practice.
Thank you.
Catch up again soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Keep in touch.
All right. Sounds good. See you, Nate.
See you later.
Bye. So thanks so much, Nate, for taking the time to tell us a little bit about what it's been like to be a therapist, particularly a couples therapist from the lens of an Enneagram 3 wing 4. It was super interesting to hear Nate's take on what it's like to be the best, or like the achiever type, with also like this very strong drive to be an individual and be unique and different, and what that's been like for him as he helps a lot of couples navigate some of kind of the hills and valleys of being in a marriage. So thanks so much to Nate, and thanks so much to my audience for hanging out with us and listening to what it's like to be a therapist who's also figuring out their own personality and their own style and how we can help people best. So I'm super excited for the series. I can't wait to keep sharing stuff with you guys because I just think it's so interesting and helpful, and I hope you find value in it too. So thanks so much for sticking around, and I will catch you in the next video.